So what we see is that cartoons stay in this kind of satire uh, for most of the 19th century. And then things become a little bit more direct as tensions escalate with the start of World War One and different ideologies. Keep in mind that at the beginning of the 20th century in the United States, there were real big concerns about the direction of capitalism and the merits of socialism or communism, and all three of these were, vying for different influences in the government and in the population. So what we see is that the socialist magazine, a very radical magazine for its time, called The Masses. And I shared one of those with you on Google Classroom. I'll give you more details about that when the assignment posts. But this was a magazine of extreme left socialist thinkers, poets, reporters, artists, musicians, and they all put it together in this magazine called The Masses that ran from 1911 to 1918. Uh, so let's just take a look at how blunt and direct they took editorial cartooning. The caption is, "Come on in, America, the blood's fine." This deals with war. And what we see is a skeletal image holding three naked women that are the embodiment of England, France, and Germany. That, they're trying to seduce America into the war, and this is a very strong anti-war message. If we look at another piece by, well, this one is by Robert Minor, but it was also featured in The Masses. At Last, The Perfect Soldier. This is pretty straightforward. Huge hulking person who can't think for themselves. That's what they think the ideal soldier would be. What they think the government thinks the ideal soldier would be. Now, this publication wrinkled or ruffled a lot of feathers. It did not always go over well with the public. And with the passage of the Espionage Act in, 1917? Let me check real quick. Yes, 1917. The publication came under heavy fire. So essentially what the Espionage Act was trying to do was limit interference in military operations and military recruiting. It also limited what you could say, and you could not support any of America's enemies. And I know you're thinking, wait a second, doesn't that go against the whole idea of free speech? Well, most people would say yes, but the Supreme Court in 1919 said, no, you can still have free speech, but limit what you can say about America's enemies. I don't know. Doesn't really make sense to me. It's been highly contested. Um, Now, some major parts of it were repealed with the Sedition Acts that came later, but the uh, the Espionage Act still holds. Oh well. Anyway, the Espionage Act even though the masses tried to comply with this, uh, they were eventually shut down. After a long court battle, they had to close up shop. They started back up in different iterations over the years, but the original and kind of groundbreaking publication that it was never regained its previous traction and influence. John Sloan, another uh, another socialist artist here. John Sloan is known for his depictions of New York City and what was the Ashcan School. The Ashcan School was really about showing what life was really like in the city and the grittiness and the people, and not over glamorizing it or anything like that, but showing the realness and the authenticity of it. So what we see are paintings like this. You can see that the brushwork is kind of loose, but it's all kind of hustling, bustling city that you would think of when you think of New York City in the 19 teens. But he also did editorial cartoons like this, where you see a soldier with his entrails being dragged across the ground, going up to an aristocrat and asking, what will become of him. And of course, he says, after the war, a medal and maybe a job. Kind of leaning into this idea that the people who finance the war are not the ones that pay the price, and that they aren't even guaranteed a job when they get home. Now, since this time, there have been other things like the GI Bill and things to help people or veterans regain some footing into society and re-enter society and live a somewhat normal life. But at this point in time, they are pretty much cannon fodder. Rube Goldberg, he's best known for these cartoons, the Rube Goldberg machines that make something very simple, like opening a beer bottle here, into a super elaborate thing. You light the candle, the ball drops, it knocks this thing, shoots the gun upward, pokes a hole in the pipe, fills the water bucket, da 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 da. But he also was a big proponent of pacifism and peace, and not really buying into what would become the Cold War and this threat of nuclear war that we see. Um, so this is super obvious, and you see that these cartoons are really getting, just in your face uh, about this, right? That we are looking at the typical American household, the suburban life, on the atomic bomb about to fall off and destroy the world. Serious tensions in a very anxiety ridden time. For your viewing pleasure, if you want to go to the actual Prezi, I have a link to a Rube Goldberg machine in operation in the form of an OK Go video. I'm not going to get into that right now because that's just kind of fun. All right. But it won't let me go on. Here we go. All right. This is a more contemporary, uh, excuse me, idea of the anti-war political cartoon, editorial cartoon. Here you're seeing, instead of raising the flag of Iwo Jima, we're seeing raising the flag of ExxonMobil, buying into the theory that the invasion of Iraq wasn't about weapons of mass destruction, but about getting claims to oil fields. Um, I'll let you decide for yourself on that one. War, good for the few, bad for most. Another pretty obvious example here. Now, Halliburton was the company for which Dick Cheney worked before he became vice president. It was pretty much an oil services company, and there is a lot of controversy because it was awarded this huge government contract to supply food and fuel and other sorts of services to the Iraqis and to the American soldiers during the Iraqi occupation. Now, there were claims that Cheney was still profiting off of Halliburton at this time. Those are pretty debunked, but we can all draw a line that he definitely helped his friends get this contract for something that they weren't really accustomed to doing. Um, and, overnight, Halliburton went from a fairly limited player in government contracts to one of the uh, biggest players in government contracts. So they made, I think, like $5 billion off of this operation in its first year. So yeah, there's definitely some friendly dealing there. I'm not exactly sure if it was anything criminal, but it is what it is. And that concludes cartoons and illustration. Stay tuned for the next episode of Mr. King Teaches War and Art over the Internet. I've got to come up with a better title.